Gracious God, I pray once again this morning that the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts will be now and always acceptable in thy sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. In today's gospel reading, we find two approaches to entertaining. I'm sure that we can identify with both approaches, that of Mary and that of Martha. Mary had a laid-back, a much more spontaneous approach. She was sitting at the feet of Jesus, enjoying his company, waiting for people to get hungry enough to get up and do something about it. Martha, on the other hand, had the all-out approach. She was knocking herself out to prepare a meal for Jesus and his disciples. And unfortunately, the meal got in the way. The meal Martha served only served to be a wedge between herself and the Lord. But in Martha's defense, she was only following the customs of her day. Let's take a closer look at those customs. In verse 38, we read that Martha welcomed Jesus into her home. Now in Palestine, you don't just invite people in. There's an unspoken expectation about what you do. Just like in Newfoundland, a cup of tea doesn't mean just a cup of tea. It means a full-fledged meal. In Genesis 18, 1 to 14, we hear how Abram invited 3 travelers in. He invited them to stay and said, "Let me bring a little bread." Then he went to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." Do you know how much 3 measures are? 3 measures of flour equals up to a bushel of flour and are at least equal to a 5-gallon bucket. I wouldn't want to knead all that dough at one time. That's a lot of flour, isn't it? Then Abraham went to a servant and had him butcher and prepare a whole calf. The hospitality code of the ancient Near East contained a definite expectation that you'd go all out. In a land full of nomads, you provided a big meal to travelers. Out in the wilderness, the big meal could spell the difference between life and death. And so Martha followed the customs of her time, and she went all out to prepare and serve this meal. We must also keep in mind how much company she had. There may very well have been more than 100 people. Jesus himself, the 12 disciples, and then the 70 whom Jesus sent out and who returned, plus everyone else who was tagging along. And so we can just picture Martha going around and around in circles as she served this meal. We all know what it's like to have too much to do and not enough time to do it in. We go from task to task, getting more and more frustrated, getting more and more flustered. And that's what Martha was doing. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She came up to Jesus to get Mary's help. She stopped and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself?" Though those of us who are older sisters can certainly identify with that. She was certainly bothered by the fact that she was the only one doing all the work. But Jesus sensed that there was more to it than all that serving. She was so worried and distracted by all the preparations that she was missing the point of people eating together. One of the things I have to say I really appreciate about when we get together down here in the kitchen, people seem to be so calm and cool, and it's wonderful. When people get together for a meal, they're supposed to enjoy each other's company. That's the whole purpose of our potluck meals after our worship from time to time. And when you get an opportunity to have Jesus over for supper, all the more reasons to go easy on preparation and do like Mary did, to sit, listen, and choose the good portion that will not be taken away. Martha wasn't focused on the point of company. She was going around and around, but not quite on target. There may be those of us who can certainly identify with her. Martha was off-center, missing the point. She was not centered on Christ and his presence in her home. She was centered on herself, complaining about what she had to do, complaining about what Mary was not doing. Unfortunately, that is the way it is in the church from time to time, isn't it? Many complain about what they do and complain that others aren't doing anything. Our actions, like Martha's, are often off-center. The scriptures command us to center our lives on Christ. The question for us this morning is this: are we really centered on Christ? And if our lives are not centered on Christ, then where are they centered? Are we distracted by our many tasks, by the busyness of our lives? As people, we can center our lives on lots of things besides Christ. We can center our lives on our marriage, our children, our homes, our work, the environment, justice issues, church work, community service, health, wealth, pleasure, and yes, my friends, for some, even hatred and revenge. Jesus cautioned Martha, and he cautions us to make sure our lives are centered on what will not be taken away. If we are centered on someone or something other than Christ, then that center will be taken away from us. We'll lose it, if not right away, then eventually. If we're centered on someone or something other than Christ, then we will be out of harmony with God, out of harmony with others, and out of harmony with ourselves. The good news for Martha was sitting right there in the room with her. And the good news for us is that Jesus Christ is right here with us today in this place of worship. And he invites us to center our lives on him, who himself was centered on God and centered on us. We are reminded in today's gospel again that Jesus was on his way, journeying toward Jerusalem, toward the cross, journeying toward his destiny of serving us. At Martha's house, and Sunday after Sunday here at this altar, Jesus is serving. He told us he didn't come to be served, but to serve.